Up, 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 up. Okay. Hello and welcome to Spinoza Session number 4. It's the 4th in our series of Spinoza Sessions, which we started to compensate to some extent for the fact that our space in The Hague, West Den Haag, is closed for the moment. It's going to be closed until June 3rd, in case you were wondering. This series is part of the Taustazine series of articles and publications, web publications that we have been running every day. And as part of this Taustazine series, we have the very many articles about art in crisis and art in the crisis of this situation where people cannot access art the way they are used to, or at least some kinds of art. Of course, you can always access net art, but some of the more conventional forms of art are a little bit less accessible than we are used to having them, especially also theater and film, which will be some of the last forms of art which will become accessible in the more communal modes of appreciation of those forms. What else is there to say? We will be today. My special guest is Torkild Thanem. Very happy to welcome him. He's a professor of management and organization studies at Stockholm University in Sweden. And his work focuses on the ethical, political, and embodied aspects of organizational life. And over the past decade, he has drawn on Spinoza's thought to explore this in the realms of leadership, management, and gender. His most recent book is Embodied Research Methods, co-authored with David Knights and published by Sage in 2019. Torkild was also a participant in our Spinoza Passionate Reason Symposium last year, and we featured his lecture at on the Taustazine yesterday. So you can check on taustazine.nl, THUISTEZIEN.nl, or on the West Den Haag website. You can see those articles right away, and you can watch his fantastic presentation on Bjorn Borg from and Spinoza's ethics in the organizational management of that very famous brand. So let me see if I can bring you in here. No, that's not what I want. Okay, Torkild, welcome.
Thank you.
How are you?
Fine, thank you. Pleasure to to meet you, even though it's digitally mediated. But yeah, good to see you again, and great to be part of this this excellent series.
Thank you. So let's start with your interest in Spinoza. Maybe you can give a little bit of an outline of your practice as it stands right now, and how you got interested in Spinoza, and whether Spinoza still factors into the way that you're working these days in understanding the world.
Yeah, well, I suppose I stumbled upon Spinoza when reading the works of Gilles Deleuze and also Deleuze's co-authored writings with Felix Guattari, and what really got me sucked into Deleuze and Guattari's work was this notion of the body without organs, which of course operates in a variety of fashions in their writings. But what I was particularly intrigued by was the transgressive ways in which the body without organs was articulated in their book A Thousand Plateaus. It very much resonated with me, that concept. It really gave me hope that there were other ways, alternative ways of being embodied, of being and becoming with our bodies beyond the cis-normative and heteronormative structures of the male-female divide and so on. So that's that's how I got into Deleuze, I suppose, and then reading Deleuze and Guattari, and also reading lots of the secondary literature. Of course, I recognize, I started to realize that, well, Spinoza plays an important role in Deleuze's work, and reading Keith Ansel Pearson's commentary on Deleuze and on Deleuze and Guattari, sort of he insisted that in order to understand this notion of the body without organs, you need, well, he recommended that one reads the body without organs in Spinozian terms, starting out with the question of what a body can do. So that's really, that's a long-winded way of saying, how I got interested in Spinoza, and then I picked up the ethics, and pretty much immediately put it down again. It was just like staring into a brick wall. The geometrical structure didn't appeal to me at all, and of course he was very different from what I'd read of Deleuze, and very different from Deleuze's accounts of Spinoza. So then I put him down for a number of years, and until I sort of slowly started to work myself back into him through the ethics, but also through the theological political treatise and the political treatise. The political treatise, of course, which contains a number of interesting formulations about about the organization and leadership of the state and government and so on. And then, of course, the theological political treatise, which contains so many astute observations about leaders and leadership. So that's, I suppose, how I've been drawing on Spinoza most recently.
So these organizational concerns, government concerns of leadership, those are concerns about the management of bodies. Maybe can we say it that way? That I'm trying to. I mean, in Spinoza's Ethics, in this, at least in the part 2, there's a long discussion of what a body is, a human body is, and there's a discussion of. I mean, this is something which I still really have trouble getting my head around, and maybe you can help me a bit here about what does he actually mean by a body, a human body as something distinct from substance or bodiness in general, or embodiedness. You have the body, which distinguishes itself, like has a distinct, well, finitude, right? It has something that ends, right? It's not like the ever expansive immanent substance of God or nature. A body has an end, and that makes it have a mind too, right? Or that's what gives the tension there between let's say identity and immanence. And this is what we're dealing with organizations, I guess, and trying to understand how societies work, and what kind of forms of societies are most amenable for human emancipation, for human beings to explore their capacities to, what was it? Explore all the things a body can do.
Yeah, why not? I mean, I think this notion of how bodies are managed is an interesting one. How bodies are organized and how bodies are structured. But Spinoza, of course, he picks a fight with Descartes on that issue, doesn't he? Arguing that in order to know how the body is structured, we first need to explore what the body can do. And of course, what a lot of organizations do, and managers and leaders, they just bypass. There's a long history of bypassing that question of what the body can do, and just turning straight away to this issue of how can we, with the rational faculties of our minds, how can we best manage the bodies of our employees. Now, admittedly, these things have become increasingly complex and complicated and co-involved over the past few decades, where contemporary capitalisms and business firms operating under contemporary capitalism are starting to pay more and more attention to how they can best get as much out of people and our bodies, our minds, and our desires as they can, how they can best realize the infinite potential of our bodies. And that's led to a shift from the sort of these direct efforts to manage and control bodies. And this has led to more subtle forms of control, which very much thrive on seeming to liberate the desires and forces of our and interests of our bodies and of ourselves. Yeah, sorry, I'm here. I'm not being very concrete at that, but I think what's going on at the sportswear company Björn Borg, for example. For those of you who watched that lecture yesterday, is a good example of how they are trying to both liberate and manage and exploit the desires, our bodily desires. To be the best we can, our bodily desires to work out, to have fun, and put our identities and our hobbies and interests, into the work we do.
So, in your study, organizational study of Björn Borg, you explored how the management was implementing an exercise regime to get everybody into good shape. Apparently, that was a kind of what would you call biopolitical agenda, whereby, let's say, rather than letting the body be all the things it could be, or the bodies be all the things they could be, it was rather giving a particular notion of maybe having the body not get in the way of the mind by being sickly or tired or some other way.
Sure, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's a fairly limited form of embodiment, and it's a fairly limited range of body technologies that are being employed through that kind of athletic regime. But of course, what makes this so seductive for most of the people working there, at least, is that they enjoy working out, and their bodies feel good, they say, working out. So it's a tricky one. And me, spending 18 months at the company working out with them, I came there as a real skeptic and a bit of a couch potato, I must admit. But I increasingly started to enjoy being part of that workout regime. And after I left, after I left the field, it's I started missing it. So, now with the coronavirus, I don't dare go to the gym or anything, but I'm here. I find myself logging on to my gym's website, following following these 30-minute cross training exercise shows, just to get my body moving and so on and so forth. So yeah, but sure, and to some extent, I think even management at Björnborg would admit this. If exercising the body in this way, in these ways, becomes an all-encompassing, an all-consuming endeavor, then it would, get out of hand. Then it would impair. Then it would reduce people's enjoyment of it. It would reduce people's ability to enhance their bodily capacities, and it would even get in the way of performance optimization. So yeah, it's complicated. To put it simply,
as everything is. I guess the notion that is for a lot of people who are discovering Spinoza, that is very attractive in Spinoza, is that there is no strong distinction between, or at least there's no definite distinction between body and mind in Spinoza's writing. So by exercising or by improving your body, you're also improving your mind's capacity to act. There's no, so the yeah, both functions feed each other. The mind is reproduced by the body is reproduced by the mind. I guess nowadays the separation, the specialization that is generally demanded of people in the professional workforce requires that they either use their mind or their body. And I'm wondering how maybe this kind of regime allows or hopes to synthesize those two capacities of or those two attributes of human existence. You mentioned in your analysis that that people got kind of burnt out after a while, and indeed, though people really enjoyed it, they usually didn't stay at the company that long. Maybe that because of the intensity of the demands, but also maybe there is some kind of cognitive dissonance, and maybe this is a mind-body dissonance, whereby the body is being trained to serve maybe the intellectual capacities of the worker, but the worker's work has some kind of fundamental disembodiment, like that. I mean, the work of a manager, somebody managing a industrial production somewhere, has this cognitive dissonance which can't be overcome by just being fit.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, the Björnborg company had quite high turnover figures when they, at around the time when senior management was changed, and the new CEO came in and they implemented this exercise regime as part of a plan to double their sales and maximize profits and so on. But since then, sure, people turnover figures have been somewhat lower, even though people have continued to come and to go. What they would say is that the exercise regime has not been seen as a reason why people have why people have quit, but other things instead have sort of factored in. For example, not getting on with one's closest manager and so on. So there have been various factors here. When it comes to the exercise of leadership as such, I also feel that that their CEO, he's really adamant that that management can't just be cognitive. I think one of the things is as a leader, as a manager, I need to be physically present at work, and you can see that in the way he sort of makes sure to be first in line at every sports hour, but also how he makes sure to just the way he carries his own body when giving pep talks and lectures to staff and so on and so forth. So in a way, his leadership style is very much embodied, and consciously so. I suppose the next question is, what kind of embodiment is being expressed here and cultivated? And that, of course, is a very specific, and some would say incredibly narrow sense of embodiment, a highly masculine, athleticist sense of embodiment, which liberates, enhances certain capacities, but of course cuts off and limits other capacities,
which are less conducive to the productivity metrics that they are pursuing, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
Hard to say because all of the, what they call it, EQ, emotional quotient constituent to working in an organization, that's not necessary. I get maybe that can be improved by the fact that you feel healthier, physically healthier, so you feel emotionally more balanced and more resilient to handle difficulties in the job. But being sensitive and being open to each other is not necessarily trained by a heavy physical routine. But I guess the assumption is that if you feel healthy, you're going to be more emotionally resilient, and that emotional participation in work will be improved.
Yeah, there's a huge. I mean, they're part of a big trend, of course. And at the moment, I'm writing up a chapter for a book project, and I'm getting into this literature on corporate athletics and corporate athleticism, which very much revolves around a group of psychologists and exercise physiologists who have established something known as the Human Performance Institute. Their point is that being fit, exercising will help you perform better at work, but it will also make you happier. It'll make you kinder, a nicer person. It'll because it will enhance your energy levels, right? And therefore it will enhance your ability to manage stress and so on. And stress, they say, stress is the real problem here, or at least how we deal with stress, because it's when we're stressed out, that we get grumpy and frustrated and angry and and not very kind to other people and so on and so forth. Yeah. Of course, that's again, their view of this, and a view which seems to have caught on among a lot of companies and a lot of executives. But again, of course, they don't really seem to acknowledge that all these highly individualized activities might also feed into an incredible sense of narcissism and focus on on one's own body image and so on. So yeah, I think they're really only acknowledging one part of the story there, in my view.
So, what is the danger there that you see with this narcissism? Of course, like every corporation has a kind of narcissism about itself, right? That, of course, it's very concerned with its own image, its
Mm,
own public image, and
mm,
that, and so that I guess people are by cultivating their own individual narcissistic self improvement regime, that they are contributing to the also to the integrity of the corporation, which is also a word for body, right?
mm,
um, that the corporate identity, which is also in itself narcissistic,
mm.
and that is acting out in the society as a competitive, commercial, productive force, right? Well, what is the danger there that you see? Is there a central concern for you?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, if if we're only concerned about our own well-being and our own our own um, our own happiness, then I think we will be lesser interested and lesser capable of reaching over and seeking fruitful collaboration and fruitful company with other people. I think again Spinoza is interesting here, is important here, because he sort of is brutally honest when it comes to these things. He acknowledges the fundamental egoism in human nature through his notion of ah
Donatus?
the conatus, exactly. But of course, it doesn't end there. But he well, I shouldn't say quickly, but eventually, at least, um, reaches the conclusion that well, to benefit our own um, our own selfish interests, we need to reach across and found coalitions with other people with more or less similar interests to ourselves. Hence, we need to temper that that short-sighted egoism.
So maybe we don't need to do that in the company, or maybe it's even as we act within the company. It's better to act kind of to the greatest degree possible as a part of the machine, a productive assemblage of the company. But when in the greater society, that's where maybe the disconnect will become also more problematic if we're trained to spend 8 hours a day being this optimized individualist, and then we have to go back into the society.
Yeah. Again, I think this is tricky and becoming increasingly complicated in today's business world, because if the organization man, which was described by Walter White in the 1950s, was this very sort of strict, sovereign, rational individual, and which populated the grand multinational corporations of America back in the 50s. Then today's, at least in principle, and at least in sort of in the kind of image that corporations want to give on themselves, this has been replaced by increasing focus on teamwork, yeah, and collaboration, and that you're only as strong as your team, and so on and so forth. So there is definitely that too. The trouble, though, is, as I see it, has to do with the tellers of the corporation, namely the tellers of the purpose of profit maximization. It's that incredibly narrow bottom line which really puts us all into a lot of trouble, both individuals and groups working in organizations, but also, of course, customers, local communities, and, well, this planet, given how the profit drive has impacted the ecology of this planet. So yeah.
Yeah, then we're getting to rationalization and reasons to work or reasons to behave in a certain way to constrain your freedom for the benefit the of more people or in order to collaborate. Certainly, as you mentioned, this telos of profit maximization is only one reason to collaborate that we could have. And as Spinoza indicates, of course, we can have many teloses in mind, and we and but one has dominated, and that is the telos of profit maximization, which has the rationalization to it that uh, ac- accumulating profit is a good in itself, and it's a incontestable good. So whatever you may think is good, one thing we are sure is good is profit maximization. So we should do that, because if we have a lot of money, I mean, who is we? That's also the question. Then everybody is better off. And then, under those circumstances, with everybody better off because somehow wealth has been uh, distributed among the profits have been distributed. Of course, this is part of the rationalization, which is a little bit fuzzy. Um, then our other capacities of freedom, of free action and free collaboration are emancipated. That has to come first, though. The profits have to come first.
Yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of rationales are being mobilized in order to justify capitalism and the profit motive. And I think they are becoming, well, I shouldn't say increasingly sophisticated, but some of them are perhaps more sophisticated than others. Some of them may be more devious than others, and certainly one thing which is often, one card which is often played is that if we don't do it, then someone else will. So if the government taxes our corporations too heavily, and undermine our profitability, then we'll be taken over by foreign companies who will care even less for the people living in this community, or in this country, or in this region. So there are loads of different rationales being played up, I suppose. But at the end of the day, I'd say they stand in, at least in some contrast to the societal rationales that Spinoza very often highlighted, namely, the fruition of freedom and welfare.
Yeah, speaking of that, then we can go to our other topic that we wanted to handle, and that's the question of public health. Because again, this is a situation which maybe shortly after the war, it was quite clear that this is something where profit maximization could not take place, and the affordance of public health would not be provided effectively. Or what you want is everybody to be healthy, and everybody to have no concerns about their health, and if they have concerns about their health, they could get treatment in a way that does not imperil them financially, existentially. This kind of situation was apparent at the end of the war, and public health was a priority of every so-called Western nation and Eastern nation as well. I mean, uh, in the socialist countries was also obviously um, uh, considered to be fundamental to what a society is supposed to offer, what a government is supposed to offer, what a state should have as a base condition of existence for the population. And that is irrespective of profit motive or how much it costs,
Mhm.
right? And it's because the public health ensures, yeah, a maximum emancipation of human potential
Mhm.
on a very fundamental level,
Mhm.
right? If you do not have to worry about your health when you wake up in the morning, or if you ever have a concern, and you go through your life and you know that, well, whatever happens, I'm going to get treatment because I'm going to be okay,
Mhm.
because it's there and it's affordable or free.
Mhm. Mhm.
This fundamentally changes the way you go about your life.
Mhm.
Um, but that way of thinking has come under assault under neoliberalism, which has been pressuring governments to, with a kind of other rationalization, which is today showing its limits, I think, to a large degree, that somehow the private sector can deliver these services more efficiently and better, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think maybe public health and the public health discourse has played a bigger role here than we often acknowledge, because in early post-war times, of course, communicable diseases were still a big problem right after the war. Many countries, many well-to-do Western countries were struck by the polio and the polio crisis, and this often struck the youngest and seemingly most healthy parts of the population. But once that communicable diseases uh, came to be seen as lesser ills in a public health context, and individual lifestyle related diseases became the big killers and big diseases of at least Western populations, then we see a shift. We see an incredible individualization of responsibility. So your relationship to the rest of society, to other people, becomes a lesser concern. And the individual body and your ability to manage and take care of your individual body becomes a priority. Ironically, of course, I mean, I think since the new public health regime of individualized public health became sort of the defining characteristic of public health in the 1970s. Ironically, people suffering from and dying from lifestyle-related diseases, obesity, cancers, heart disease, and so on, has only increased, right? So even though more responsibility have been put on us to take care of our own individual bodies, it seems that fewer and fewer of us have been able to actually do so.
This this responsibilization or individualization of responsibility, as you describe it, requires that the people are able to be adequately informed to make the right individual decisions. So if they, if they're constantly being told to drink Coca-Cola because it makes you feel good and it makes you sexy or something, then and the public health agencies are not able to sufficiently counter that narrative, then it's your own fault, and then you should accept the fact that you get diabetes because you were badly informed. I mean, isn't it? I mean, you can see how we have maybe put too much responsibility on the individual citizen in this case, or assumed, or this is a false assumption that an individual citizen is in the position to inform themselves adequately about these decisions. And now with the COVID-19 pandemic situation, you find also that people are in a situation where they were asked to make their own decisions about what to do to some extent. And it becomes a very much a serious question, a very relevant question to see, well, what do they have the adequate information, or even if they do they even know how to process that information?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, and I'm not sure it's even though this is played out differently in different countries. I'm not sure that it's simply a matter of cognition and information. I mean, public health experts have for a long time, and health psychologists, for a long time, they've been aware of this problem of cognitive behavioral dissonance. So even with perfect information, even with our so-called rational faculties intact, even when we know what to do, we don't always do what we're supposed to do. So even though I know that I shouldn't be eating that snack bar, at 9 o'clock at night, or that chocolate bar, or stuffing myself with peanuts, or binge drinking, I still do it, right? So, it's, who was it that said that, our rationality is an easy victim for our passions. Our saddest passions, they get to us whether we like it, or not.
And there
I'm not suggesting, I'm not a fatalist here, just to put that straight. But there are certainly limits which help explain these things. Limits, well, the strength of our sound passions, undermining our ability to think and act rationally and reasonably.
Yeah, well, it seems that even if we are able to act rationally and reasonably, as Spinoza encourages us to, maybe the payoff is not uh, immediately evident to us, or as evident to us enough right away. The, what do you call it? The gratification is not immediate enough for us to maintain it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we see other people having, as Spinoza also records, having lots of fun around us, and we feel, oh well, uh, that we're missing the fun because we're trying to be rational and trying to act in a way that's conducive to the greater good.
Mm-hmm.
In which case, we can turn to the political treatise, because there Spinoza is grappling with the various forms of government which are most conducive to the general good, their drawbacks and their benefits, their assets. And certainly, from my reading of the political treatise, he's relatively sanguine, or unconvinced, let's say, that human beings are really ready to manage their affairs in a radically democratic manner. Although he does seem to say that that is the best, in the end, in principle, it's the best situation if we can manage to do that for the time being. Maybe we need a strong hand of some sort, some kind of uh, body of authority that could be an aristocracy, as is called in the political treaties, which just means an assembly. What I guess what would be considered today a parliamentary system could be that kind of form in today's version. What we have today is electoral bourgeois democracy, and that dictates behaviors.
Mm.
with the authority and with the power of the law behind it, which is enforced through the physical, the embodiment of the law and the police and etc., to behave in a certain way for the general good.
Mm.
Right?
Yeah. um, yeah. Again, it's a tricky one, and today looking at the Corona crisis, and how different democracies have initiated rather different policies. At least, for me, Norwegian, living and working in Sweden, the Swedish case certainly stands out. How Sweden has relied on expert recommendations as opposed to legislation in order to manage the spread of the coronavirus. Maybe the Swedish technocrats and even the Swedish Swedish politicians have overestimated people's ability to exercise freedom reasonably and rationally. Certainly, and there are loads of newspaper reports, media reports, but even I've experienced firsthand, how few people respect the recommendation to keep physical distance in shops and so on, and also how people gather in bars and restaurants, and in parks, without abiding by those recommendations. But of course, on the other hand, in neighbouring Norway, where they've used parliamentary legislation to reduce social and physical contact between people, people are still deviating from legislation, throwing parties at home, visiting their visiting friends and visiting their country homes and so on, even though they're supposed not to be doing that. So yeah, it's a difficult one. Human nature, human rationality, and human decision making. We don't always behave like legislators or expert technocrats assume that we will behave.
Yeah, there is a kind of crisis of confidence in expert knowledge as well, so that people they'll hear some recommendation from the scientific community, for example, or through their government officials from the scientific community, and they feel that they are able to critically evaluate that information on their own.
Mm-hmm.
And this has to do also with that does show a certain amount of, can you say that it's irreverence or is self-confidence that the people over the years feel that, yes, well, we've developed our intellectual independence to the degree that we are able to or to manage the trade-off between individual self-interest and the public good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a very nice way of putting it. Yeah, we've been sort of marinated or internalized with this strong sense of individual freedom and individual responsibility, and then it matters less what experts tell us. But on the other hand, of course, then it also doesn't help that experts are frequently proven to be wrong,
Okay.
and wrong in the estimates, wrong in the recommendations, wrong in the prognosis, and wrong in the which makes the prognosis appear more like the like prophecies. So in Sweden, when the corona crisis was just starting to take off globally, even in the at the end of February, the Swedish Public Health Authority estimated that the risk of public spread, community spread of the coronavirus in Sweden was low. Now, of course, they changed their mind. They upgraded the risk from low to very high. Only 2 weeks later, but. But I think what undermines their authority was also the sort of the apparent confidence with which they communicated their first estimate.
So it has to do with the affects with which they communicated their instructions.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, why not? Yeah. I mean, Swedish technocrats or the Swedish public health authorities they're actually, on the whole, they've been praised for their humility during this crisis. But there's also sort of been. There's also, at least in Sweden, but they've also been criticized from other countries, and for example, for not being willing to admit mistakes, to not really acknowledging that perhaps they underestimated the severity of the crisis early on, and also not fully acknowledging that perhaps they overestimated citizens' ability to think and act reasonably, and to exercise our freedoms of movement reasonably.
So what is the current situation there now? How do things seem to be developing?
Well, it is, the situation is calming down, but at the same time, for compared to the neighboring countries, Sweden's death figures are incredibly high, very high. So Denmark have got half the population, and they've got 500 or 550 deaths thereabout, but in Sweden, the number of deaths is more than 3,000, and we're only twice the population. So there is a so there are definitely differences, but at the same time, I suppose people are starting to feel worn out, even by the relatively liberal restrictions that have been recommended here. People are also, I think, starting to take some comfort in the fact that the number of people in intensive care is starting to drop, and the number of deaths per day is starting to drop. But yeah. So again, like with all things, it's mixed.
Yeah. Well, in Germany also, I think we've shown that we are able to lock down if we need to. I mean, we also I don't know what is the population of Sweden?
About 10 million.
10 million. So we're 8 times the population, or almost 9 times the population of Sweden here in Germany. And I guess in order to avoid a complete, like, just an unacceptable amount of people dying, they really did need to crack down quite intensively, and they did.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, they did implement those regulations. They were more than recommendations. They really were implemented with the full force of the law in a lot of respects. The police were patrolling and breaking up gatherings, etc. And there were no house parties, or very few of them. Although people, of course, exercise their prerogatives to deviate from those measures. But as long as that didn't become the normal response, yeah.
Mhm.
And they did prove. In Germany, as you mentioned, I mean, we're also experiencing a very, very rapid decrease in new cases and in people in intensive care. So people are relieved, and they're also completely exhausted by the um, by the impact on their lives. Yeah,
Mhm.
from outside. The constraints on their freedom, or at least their unconscious enjoyment of life, which they now interpret as freedom. um, of course, you can always say that the people who died, extra people who died, well, their freedom to die was not inhibited, by strong uh, implementation of social distancing, etc., in Sweden. So that actually people were more free to die in Sweden. uh,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you were a euthanasiast, then maybe that would be an interesting point of view to entertain. Yeah.
it has been mentioned here by some politicians. Of course, now with the loosening, there's a great rush, really mobilized and motivated by the commercial sector to get things back to normal as soon as possible and get the consumption up and get the so-called get the economy going on back the way it was. I guess that's also the case in Sweden.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what strikes me is how quick a number of companies were to act. And closing down their offices, telling their people, telling employees not to come into the office, not to make business trips, and so on and so forth, taking much stricter measures than had been advised and recommended by public health authorities. And this goes with Sweden, Norway, a number of countries. Now, on the other hand, they they are pushing they are for a much sooner opening up of social and economic life again, because of course it hurts the profit motive, it hurts the economy, it hurts their survivability, particularly in some industries. So again, I think there's businesses have been acting as inconsistently and selfishly as you could that one might suspect, given their the profit motive. I reckon that a lot of this has been a lot of the decisions that were made, to take strict measures on social distancing and closing down offices and banning business travel for employees. A lot of that was done not so much to manage actual risk, manage health risks, but more measures made in order to manage reputational risk, manage the image of the organization in the public's eye, in the market's eye.
And at the same time, it's resulted in taking everything online to an extent that had not happened before. So even in the case of arts institutions, they're all making online programs for their their public, and universities have all come online, and we see that now there is a tendency towards, or at least there's reports of amalgamation. So whereby universities, maybe now that everybody's online, you don't need so many different universities. You can just have like one big university.
Yeah, you could do everything through MOOCs, massive online courses, right? Yeah, I've been teaching online since since late March, and Stockholm University was quick to move online, and as I suppose most universities have done. But the question will be, how will this affect teaching, higher education? How will this affect work life in the long term? Certainly early on, a number of digitalization experts were sort of coming out and claiming that at last, even those organizations which have resisted or have resisted digitalization, or have been slow to go digital, now at last they're forced to go digital. But there are some problems with this assumption. One problem is that are they digitalizing the right things? Are they digitalizing things that could be automated through digital technology? Services, production processes which need all of a sudden need no or very little human intervention? Or are they digitalizing other things? And of course, the easiest thing to digitalize are these things that we're doing right now. So, most organizations, it seems to me, they are now digitalizing the wrong things. They're digitalizing social human interaction.
What do you mean by that? Which organizations? The companies?
Well, by closing down their offices, telling their employees to work from home rather than come into the office, they are digitalizing human interaction.
Mm-hmm. What's at stake there for you?
What's at stake? I think already we are seeing how we're starting to experience how much of a toll that this is taking on our lives. Yeah. Again, you've got digitalization experts. For example, we've got someone here in Sweden, a millennial and digital native, who's a professor in brain science, who says that, well, there's no need for the office anymore because now we can just meet virtually. Seemingly, this person is completely aloof to the limitations of virtual meetings. How a number of my students now, master students, they're doing projects, pilot studies for the research methods course, and a number of them, they are studying this exactly. How are people dealing with the digitalization of work? How are they dealing with this forced new forced regime of working from home? And again, it's not really speaking to the benefit of the digital meeting technology such as Zoom, what we're using here. Sure, I mean, people are appreciating not having to commute, spend loads of time commuting into the office. People are appreciating not being unduly disturbed by colleagues, but people are also finding it difficult to concentrate, difficult to focus. They find that there are way too many meetings which are digitalized Zoom meetings, which are wearing them out. And also they are missing the opportunity for spontaneous, short meetings.
Yeah, that's where the potentially the real creativity or the real unexpected outcomes, and maybe as you intimated, the social dimension of work takes place, right? Which is work is not just about productivity and getting things done, but also there is this meaningful part, this socially meaningful aspect.
Yeah, yeah. I think, it's interesting to look at the terms here. On the one hand, we've got social media, and then on social media technologies, and I suppose the Zoom technology that we're using now can be seen as can be one example of that. On the other hand, authorities and everybody are talking about social distancing as opposed to physical distancing. And at first I was a bit puzzled, but it's not, we're using social technologies here. We're not socially distancing. We are interacting socially through these technologies. But thinking more about it, I came to think that, well, yeah, it's not just physical distancing. It is actually social distancing, because something part of the social is going missing when we remove the physical dimension of it. Yeah, the ability to meet socially in the same physical space, even something social is missing.
So there's
That's the embodied aspects of the social interaction. Okay, we're meeting face to face here, but as you said earlier, we're just heads in a box, heads on a screen. It's just visual, yeah, and even visually, we're all framed up. There are
so
no smells, there are no tastes, and the actual, even the visual stimuli are typically much blander than they would have had we met in physically in the same physical space, and mediated by the digital video technology.
So coming back to embodiment, I guess, to close maybe, this notion of situated embodiedness, right, where we are where we are physically in a space,
Mm.
and when we are more than just alone, but when we are together in the same space, uh, this has some qualitative difference.
Mm.
And the space itself maybe is also important constituent of this. What I look at with my students is that the Zoom and the screen and the computer becomes a kind of body
Mm.
that we are part of. That the embodiment, when we're in this kind of connection with each other, the embodiment is constituted from by the computers, by the router, by the cables which connect us, and that is the body that, when if we want to talk about how we are embodied now.
Mm.
And all you see on the top of the body are these multiple heads,
Yeah.
kind of a hydra. But what you were talking about is a very significantly different kind of embodiment, I guess, more, what could you say, conventional. What and There is another disjunct here, which we've seen a lot with, especially with feminist critiques of this contemporary condition,
Yeah.
whereby the workplace is making an incursion into the private space as never before. So
Mm.
people who are just trying to make do with a small apartment with their children and their spouse,
Mm.
now have to provide a telecommunications desk space, which is now a vital part of the functioning of the company, etc.
Mhm.
So there's a kind of dislocalization taking place now too, or an incursion into the private localization. And so there's all these, yeah. I mean, we've come to that kind of um, astonishment of the complexity of it a few times during this talk.
Mm.
But uh, I'd like to try to just wander through these these positions there, that you have the conventional, where we are in the same space together, and something about the smell of the space, the way the light passes through, maybe we're cooking coffee together, so we smell the same thing.
Mm.
This thing allows for some other kind of rationality or potential,
Mm.
bodily potential of from us than what we have here with this dissociated yet connected by an international corporate embodiment.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, yeah, no. I think you think you're making a very very convincing account here. Certainly, there's only so many cues that we can bodily cues and gestures that we can communicate uh, within the four lines of these and angles of these squares, of these computer frames. Definitely. And we are typically seated as well. So, and even though, it may be, this makes it easier to perhaps, keep in touch with some people, then it seems to me that a lot of us, we are trying to minimize uh, the amount of time that we spend using this technology, because yeah, it's actually, it is wearing us out. Ironically, the people at Bjorn Borg, they knew this. They knew this way before the Corona crisis. Encouraging their staff, to take 5-minute breaks every 25th minute. Take a rest, take a break from the screen, because they knew how wearing, how draining, how straining it is to be sedated like this, and being subjected by all this blue lead radiation. So
Well, well, on that note, I guess we should encourage everybody to stand up and get away from their screens and go and do something in the outdoors, possibly. Now that it seems like the regulations everywhere are a little bit loosened. And I have to thank you, Torkild, for taking the time and being so subjecting yourselves to this exhausting practice of of telecommunication with me and exchange. Uh,
for having me. Thanks for having me. Very enjoyable, Baruch. Yeah, even though I'm starting to feel,
yeah,
that I need, yeah, I
you
need
need to move around. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay. Well, let's
lots
let's
of
take
game going. Yeah.
yeah, let's take advantage of the fact that we are free to stand up and move around when we want. Still. And I will thank everybody for watching and for following along. Vest is, as I mentioned at the beginning, West Den Haag is closed at the moment, but we are planning to open again on June 3rd. But please check back on westdenhaag.nl for the latest information about our opening times. And in the meantime, we'll still be presenting the Taustazine series of articles and videos and sound events and performances and other events like this. Next, not this coming Sunday, but the Sunday after is our next Spinoza Circle for the Spinozan Spinoza fans in the audience. The Spinoza Circle is a reading circle where we basically just sit around and read. Well, I guess we can stand around too, and read Spinoza together. So that will be on Sunday at 2 o'clock. I'm not remembering exactly, but I think it's the 31st. So please tune in for that. And so from me and from my very cherished and honored guest, Torkild Thanem, thank you very much again for being with us, and see you next time.
Bye bye.